fellow South Africans, I'm addressing you this evening.
All your years of paying tax, you helped us overcome our darkest hour. You, along with every other loyal taxpayer, helped build this nation. Thank you for every life you saved and for every risk you braved, for giving our future generation a healthy start. When you saw many of our vulnerable communities, you provided for them. When you saw our healthcare workers on the front lines battling COVID, you rose to the occasion and gave them the tools to save lives. Without your tax compliance, we wouldn't be able to fight a good fight. Thank you for contributing to the important services our vulnerable communities rely on every day. To all taxpayers and traders, continue to pay your tax because it matters to millions of South Africans who depend on it. Your tax matters.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our webinar on allowable medical expenses. Let me introduce myself. My name is Garth White, and I'm a functional specialist within the Quality Assurance team of the National Operations, Scheduling and Enablement Division. It is my privilege this evening to be facilitating this webinar, and I trust that you will enjoy your time with us and that you will learn valuable information related to the medical expenses component. So I would like to start off by please asking you to do me two favors. Firstly, we are going to be conducting a short survey at the end of this webinar. Once you are exiting the webinar, you'll be shown a short survey. Please, would you participate in it as much as possible? We'd like to have feedback from you on the quality of the information shared and the service we've offered this evening. The second favor I'd like to ask you, we would welcome you to please pose questions in the medical expenses at sars.gov.za email address. And the reason for that is we will later in the program have a panel of experts who will be answering your questions posed during this live webinar. If you are unable to post questions in the email address, please do so in the live chat, and we promise we will get to as many questions as possible this evening. If your question is not answered this evening during the live chat, please look out on our FAQs on the SARS website for the question you've posed and the answer to your question. So please, can you participate as much as possible to get value for the time you've spent with us? In getting to grips with our program, I'd like to just start off by asking you to adhere to a few housekeeping rules. Please, will you ensure that your audio, mic, and your video functionality is disabled for the duration of the webinar? That way, we are able to have the program uninterrupted or ensure that the quality of sound is kept to the best of its capability. Secondly, because we are in the midst of a load shedding crisis in the country, it is highly possible or probable that some of us will be interrupted with power supply during the when load shedding kicks in. I will ask you, if that happens, to please visit the SARS YouTube channel at the end of this webinar to view a recording of the program. If at all, please stay within the webinar so that you can get value with the live question and answering session, and you can pose questions that you do have. So I'm going to encourage you to please stay in unless load shedding interrupts your electricity supply. And then I just want to apologize. I probably will be repeatedly asking you to participate in the survey. So if I repeat myself at certain instances during the webinar, it is just me ensuring that I do remind you. So please forgive me if I do repeat myself. Before we kick in with the program, I'd like to explain there's two areas to it. The first part, we will have a presentation by an expert on medical expenses. And in the second part of the program, which is one where we will have a panel of our experts interacting with you on questions posted at the email address or on the live chat. I'd like to remind you of the email address. Remember, it's medicalquestions@sars.gov.za. So before we start, I'd like to just read you a statement from our strategic objectives, and then I would start with the program. So in line with the SARS Strategic Objective 6, which is to modernize systems to provide seamless online digital services, and Strategic Objective 8, which is to work with and through our stakeholders to improve tax systems, the e-filing and SARS Mobi app platforms have been enhanced to be accessible for use with screen reading software used by persons with visual disabilities. Persons with visual disabilities are therefore encouraged to use these online platforms for quick and easy query resolution. Services that can be successfully performed on the e-filing and SARS Mobi app include, but are not limited to, obtaining notice of registration, completing tax returns, viewing your notice of assessment, and the request for additional documentation, if it's applicable. Submitting of supporting documents, viewing your statement of account, and viewing the audit outcome letter once an audit is finalized is also available. The e-booking and SARS online query system on the SARS website is also accessible to persons with disabilities, including those using screen reading software. So thank you for allowing me to read that statement. So as part of our program, like I indicated, our first part of tonight, you'll be dealt a presentation by an expert, and it is now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Mr. Kunrad Berger, who will be conducting the presentation with you. So if I could just give you some background into Kunrad. Kunrad Berger is a legal specialist in the Specialized and Alternative Dispute Resolution Unit. He holds over 28 years experience in the field of tax at SARS. Kunrad has earned a bachelor's degree in law from the University of the Northwest. Being a person of disability, Kunrad has been involved with tax relief since 2005, when he conducted a legal comparative study looking at various countries, focusing on tax relief for medical and disability expenses. This has led to an amendment to the legislation, the confirmation of the diagnosis of disability, which we refer to as the ITR-DD form, and the list of allowable disability expenses. Kunrad remains involved in updating the list of allowable medical expenses and the ITR-DD. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll now hand you over into Kunrad's capable hands. Over to you, Kunrad.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me, Golf. Ladies and gentlemen, I think before we start, I was in a period of load shedding at 2 o'clock this afternoon. My power had to come back at 4. Unfortunately, we got news that a substation blew. So if I disappear midway through the presentation, please, one of my colleagues, just step in and complete it for me. I profusely apologize for that. Now, what's the objective for this evening?
Kunrad, are you okay? We're struggling to you on audio. Have you unmuted yourself? Ladies and gents, I do apologize. We're just trying to make do during load shedding. So if we are interrupted, I do apologize. Kunrad, are you with us? Kunrad? Ladies and gentlemen, it seems that we are having problem
Objective
with
is to understand the tax credit. Yes, I'm okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Good evening,
Kunrad.
ladies and gentlemen. Great. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to discuss with you is the additional medical and disability expenses tax credit. The objectives for tonight's seminar is basically to understand the additional medical expenses tax credit as it relates to out-of-pocket expenses for medical, physical impairment expenses incurred and paid, and then disability expenses incurred and paid. Now, before we carry on, the first thing we need to do is we need to understand what certain terms means or certain words means. Who is a dependent? A dependent is a spouse, is a person's child, or the child of the spouse. Then, any other person who is a member of, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, any other member of a person's family in respect of whom you are liable for family care and support. And then lastly, any other person recognized as a dependent of the person in terms of the rules of a medical scheme. Then spouse, who is a spouse? It is a person who is in a marriage or customary union recognized in terms of the laws of the Republic. Then a union recognized as a marriage in terms of the tenets of religion. Then a same-sex or heterosexual union, which the Commissioner is satisfied is intended to be permanent. Then who is a child? A child is a person under 18, person over the age of 18 but under the age of 21, a person over the age of 21 who is wholly or partially dependent for maintenance upon the person and has not become liable for income tax. Then a person who is over the age of 26 who is wholly or partially dependent for maintenance upon the taxpayer, or not or, and a full-time student at a educational institution of public character. So in other words, ladies and gentlemen, that is a person attending university or
Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. It seems we have some audio problems from Kunrad, so please be patient with us. Kunrad, can you hear me? Kunrad? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just trying to figure out if the audio quality is
huge audio problems.
Yes.
A person. I can hear you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kunrad.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now, Kunrad. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that, guys. Then a person is incapacitated by a disability and unable to maintain him or herself. Then who is not a child is a foster child. The period in which a child is in your care does not play a role. And then a child who has not been legally adopted or a child under your curatorship or custodianship, sorry. Disability means a moderate to severe limitation of a person's ability to function or to perform daily activities as a result of physical, sensory, communication, intellectual, or mental impairment. If the limitation has lasted or has the prognosis of lasting more than 1 year, and is diagnosed by a medical practitioner in accordance with the criteria prescribed by the Commissioner. Then physical impairment. It has been interpreted as a disability which is less restraining than a disability as defined. This means the restriction on the person's ability to function or to perform daily activities is mild. Remember what we said, a disability is a moderate to severe impairment. So a physical impairment is mild. A person with a physical impairment may claim expenses as listed in the list of qualifying physical impairment or disability expenditure, but it will be limited. If the person is under 65, then the additional medical expenses tax credit will be 25% of the qualifying expenses incurred and paid, which exceeds 7.5% of a taxpayer's taxable income. Qualifying medical expenses is any amounts other than amounts recoverable by a person or his or her spouse, which were paid by the person during a year of assessment to a duly registered medical practitioner, dentist, optometrist, homeopath, naturopath, osteopath, herbalist, physiotherapist, and we interpret physiotherapist also to mean an occupational therapist, chiropractor, or orthopedist for professional services rendered or medicine supplied to you or one of your dependents. Then the second group of qualifying expenses, nursing home or hospital or duly enrolled midwife or nursing assistant, that would include fees paid to a nursing agency in respect of illness or confinement of the person or any dependent of that person. So in other words, if I talk about person here, I mean you, the taxpayer. Then pharmacist, medicine supplied on prescription of any person or dependent of that person. Once again, that would include your spouse or your child. Then the next category is basically services rendered to you outside the Republic, which falls within the above two categories. Then the last category, qualifying medical expenses incurred and paid for physical impairment or disability of you, your spouse, or dependent. Then, what is the position of over-the-counter medicine or vitamins that you would buy at the pharmacist or at any other shop that stocks vitamins? Now, medicines and vitamins that are over the counter can only be claimed if the medicines are supplied by a pharmacist on prescription. Ladies and gentlemen, all that means that if your doctor feels, or if you feel that you need extra vitamins, etc., then your doctor must prescribe it. You must take that prescription to a pharmacist, and the pharmacist must then supply that medication on the prescription. Right. Then what is out-of-pocket medical expenses? It's the co-payments required by the medical aid, qualifying expenses but not covered by the medical aid, qualifying expenses but not claimed from your medical aid, and then listed physical impairment or disability expenses paid but not claimable from your medical aid. If you pay an amount upfront, ladies and gentlemen, and your medical aid later reimburses you, that portion for which the medical aid has reimbursed you is not an out-of-pocket expense. Then, what documents is needed for your income tax return? A certificate from your medical aid stating the contributions which you had made and the amounts not covered by the medical aid, proof of payment of the out-of-pocket medical expenses. This proof of payment, ladies and gentlemen, needs to be retained because SARS may request it later for audit purposes. Then you need to prepare a schedule of your out-of-pocket expenses. And in the next slide, we're going to see what must be in the schedule, the date on which you made the payment, to whom you made the payment, a short description of the goods or services rendered. For example, pharmacist, medicine, the person to whom the goods, services was rendered. So in other words, your spouse or your child, and the amount paid. What is the tax credit? If you are a person under 65 years, then the medical tax credit is 25% of the qualifying expenses incurred and paid, which exceeds 7.5% of your taxable income. If you are a person with only a physical impairment, so in other words, the limitation is mild, then the tax credit is 25% of the qualifying expenses incurred and paid, which exceeds 7.5% of a taxpayer's taxable income. Then, what's the meaning of disability? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think I must just give you a little bit of background. Unlike many other countries, South Africa has not legislated for disability in one piece of legislation. For example, in South Africa, you will find the definition of disability in the Social Assistance Act, in the Employment Equity Act, and in the Income Tax Act. While the core of these definitions are in accordance with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability and the South African White Paper on the Rights of Persons with Disability, there are subtle differences between these definitions to serve the specific objectives of each act. Then, ladies and gentlemen, this means that if you qualify as a person with disability under the Employment Equity Act, then it does not automatically mean that you will qualify as a person with disability in the Income Tax Act. The Income Tax Act has its own criteria which a person must meet before a person is recognized as a person with disability for income tax purposes. Then let's just recap. A disability is a moderate to severe limitation of a person's ability to function or to perform daily activities as a result of physical, sensory, communication, intellectual, and mental impairment. And the impairment has lasted or has the prognosis of lasting more than 1 year, is diagnosed by a duly registered medical practitioner in accordance with criteria prescribed by the Commissioner. Right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, yes, the Commissioner has prescribed certain criteria for moderate to severe physical, sensory, communication, intellectual, and mental impairment. These criteria seek to assess the functional impact of the impairment on a person's ability to perform activities of daily activities or activities of daily living, and is diagnosed, and it is not a diagnosis of a medical condition. So a medical condition is not a disability. A person must either meet the criteria for moderate to severe physical, sensory, communication, intellectual, or mental impairment before that person is recognized as a person with disability for income tax purposes. This criteria can be found in a confirmation of diagnosis of disability form, or what we call the ITRDD form. The ITRDD must be completed and endorsed by a duly registered medical practitioner who is qualified to express an opinion on that disability. In terms of vision impairment, a practitioner trying to use a Snellen chart, for example, an optometrist or an ophthalmologist. Hearing, a practitioner to perform or conduct a battery of diagnostic audiometry tests, for example, an ear, nose, and throat specialist or an audiologist. Speech language pathologist. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is your normal speech therapist. Then physical, orthopedic surgeon, neurosurgeon, physiotherapist, occupational therapist. Intellectual, psychiatrist or clinical psychologist. Ladies and gentlemen, this can also include your educational psychologist. Then mental, once again, is a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist. A medical practitioner may complete an ITRDD as long as a GP is in possession of a report from the medical practitioner confirming the disability. Right. Then, what must be completed on the ITRDD? In Part B of the ITRDD, the medical practitioner must complete the appropriate diagnostic criteria. In Part C of the ITRDD, the medical practitioner must, amongst other things, indicate and describe if the functional limitations in respect of performing daily activities are regarded as mild, moderate to severe. Remember what we said. If it's mild, then it's only a physical impairment. If it's moderate to severe, then it's a disability. Indicate if the disability has lasted or is expected to last for a continuous period more than 12 months. If it's less than that, then you will see later on what the ITRDD, it has an impact on the validity requirement of the ITRDD. Right, for how long is the ITRDD valid? If a disability is temporary, that is, if the disability is expected to last for 12 months or less, the ITRDD is valid for 12 months. If the disability is permanent, the disability is expected to last for more than 12 months. Then, if the person has qualified as a person with disability for the first time after 1 March 2019, the ITRDD will be valid for 10 years. If the person qualified as a person with disability for the first time before 1 March 2019, and on 1 March 2019, the person held a valid ITRDD from the expiry date thereof, the ITRDD will be valid for a further 5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please just give me an opportunity? I know what I'm doing now is unprofessional. Just give me an opportunity to plug in my computer. My power just came back on. Golf, if you don't mind. It's It's going to take 5 minutes or 5
No.
seconds.
No, I completely understand, Kunrad. No problem.
I just want to.
While Kunrad is reconnecting to electricity, I would like to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, to please pose questions in our Q&A component of this webinar, or at the email address medicalexpenses@sars.gov.za. Also, please be reminded that at the end of this webinar, for those of you who have joined late, you will be asked to complete a short survey. I'm going to encourage you to participate as much as you possibly can so that we can have feedback on the quality of this webinar as well as the information that has been supplied. I acknowledge the fact that we have had challenges with sound quality. Unfortunately, load shedding does affect the quality of our connection. So I apologize profusely for that. Also note that Kunrad has not enabled his video portion on the webinar or functionality to ensure that his battery life lasted and to ensure that the best quality of sound comes through. So I trust that you will understand our challenges during load shedding and that you'll be patient with us. I have seen on the Q&A portion of the webinar, we are starting to get questions through, and I am grateful for that. I'll encourage you to post your questions there, because the second part of this webinar, we will have a group of our experts answering the questions on the email platform or on the Q&A portion of this webinar. Once again, if we don't deal with it during the live webinar, please visit our website and have a look under our FAQs, both for your question and the response thereto. I'm just reminding you, we're just allowing Kunrad to complete the connection back to normal electricity supply, and I'm hoping that it will improve the sound quality on the presentation. Up to now, Kunrad's been a real warrior. If I was presenting without power supply, I'd be sweating profusely and probably stuttering with anxiety. So Kunrad, once you are ready, please let me know. And
I'm ready. Thank you, Golf.
Thank you so much. I will hand back to Kunrad.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line to this all is that you don't need to obtain an ITRDD every year if the disability is permanent, okay, and you don't need to obtain an ITRDD every year until the validity period of your ITRDD has lapsed. Right. Golf, I must say now I can also relax. Whose disability expenses can be claimed? The taxpayer's spouse, the taxpayer's child, the child of the spouse. Any other member of the taxpayer's family in respect of whom the taxpayer is liable for family care and support. Any other person who is recognized as a dependent of the taxpayer's medical scheme. Right. What disability expenses can be claimed? That is the expenses that are listed or prescribed by the Commissioner. Other than the expenses that is recoverable by the taxpayer or the taxpayer's spouse. That expenses must be necessarily incurred and paid by the taxpayer during the year of assessment in consequence of physical impairment or disability. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't like using this word in context of disability, but we could not come up with a better word when we drafted the legislation, suffered by the taxpayer or any dependent of the taxpayer. Then, what is the listed expenditure? The list makes the following categories. Personal care attendant expenditure, travel and transportation expenditure, insurance, maintenance, repairs and supplies, aids and other devices, services. Then we've got continence products, we've got service animals, that's your guide dogs, etc. Alterations, modifications of assets to be acquired or that you have already acquired. Then, if expenses is not listed, it cannot be claimed. So practically, ladies and gentlemen, let's go and read the list. If the particular expense is listed, it is claimable. If it's not listed, it cannot be claimed. What is incontinence a disability? No, incontinence on its own is a medical condition and not a disability. But then the next question is, but why is the incontinence products on the list? Okay. And however, ladies and gentlemen, incontinence is a concomitant of a few physical disabilities. For example, a person with quadriplegia meets the criteria for physical disability because that person is a wheelchair user. And the injury to the spinal cord unfortunately makes that person incontinent. Okay? So obviously there is certain expenses around incontinence that the person with quadriplegia will incur. What is the position around school fees? The claimable expense include a school assistant or classroom assistant costs. School fees limited to the amount in excess of the school fees that would have been payable if the person attended the closest fee-paying public school, not specializing in learners with special educational needs. Then schools not specializing in learners with educational needs. There, the important thing is, remember, the school fees that you pay to that school will not be deductible. Only the extra expenses that you incur. Okay. Like, for instance, a classroom or a school assistant. That would be the extra expense. Then tutoring services used by a person with disability, which are supplementary to the primary education of the person with a learning disability or impairment in intellectual or mental function, and paid to somebody in the business of providing that services. So what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, is purely this. You cannot now have a child that falls within this category and then you ask the aunt or the mother-in-law to provide the tutoring services and then pay her. The important thing is the person must be in the business of providing that service. Then, what documents are needed? The certificate from the medical aid stating the contributions you had made and the amounts not covered by the medical aid. A valid ITRDD, proof of payment of the out-of-pocket and disability and medical expenses. Once again, the principle, if you pay up front and the medical aid reimburses you, that amount that the medical aid reimbursed is not deductible. Oh, it's not an out-of-pocket expense. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Then what documents are needed? Once again, you need to prepare a schedule of your out-of-pocket expenses. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you can use the very same schedule that you used for your medical expenses. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, you need to retain the proof. Okay, and if you cannot give the proof, then obviously that amount cannot be allowed. Now, just a practical tip. We all know that some of the receipts and toll slips fades over time. What I normally do, ladies and gentlemen, I scan it into my computer. I have an electronic record of it. Or if you cannot scan it, make a photostat and keep it with your other receipts. Then, what do I include in the submission of my return? Once again, the certificate from the medical aid stating my contributions and the amounts not paid, a valid ITRDD, a schedule of the out-of-pocket medical and disability expenses. What is the tax credit? The tax credit, if you are over 65, the tax credit is a third of the qualifying expenses incurred and paid. If you are a person with disability, regardless of your age, then it is also a third of the expense incurred and paid. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is just a sample ITRDD. And then lastly, ladies and gentlemen, kindly go and have a look at the guide for the determination of medical tax credits. The current list of qualifying expenses is the list which came into effect 20 March or 1 March 2020. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the list is a live document. You know, just yesterday, we started discussions on proposals made by people on what to include or not on the list. So the list is updated quite regularly. So I suggest that you go and look at the website, www.sars.gov.za, go to the individuals tab, and then you go to tax and disability. And then lastly, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to see the ITRDD and see if you will qualify as a person with a physical disability or a physical impairment, you can go to the confirmation of the diagnosis disability form, the ITRDD. You will find the criteria for the various disabilities and impairments there. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for the unprofessional conduct, but it was just something beyond my control.
Thank you very much, Kunrad, and may I assure you, it was not unprofessional. It was just as a result of something beyond our control. So thank you for a very insightful and valuable presentation. I certainly learned a lot from it, so I am very grateful to you. So thank you very much. I think you're getting very positive feedback on the chat as well. So be assured, we've learned quite a lot from your presentation this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'm going to be a pain and remind you of our short survey at the end of this webinar, which you will find once you exit the webinar. Please participate so that we can get feedback on the quality of this webinar and the service offered by our team. I'd like to now start by handing you over to the second colleague who will deal with the question and answers portion of this excuse me, webinar. She will facilitate that along with other colleagues who are experts in the field. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mpho Mtseme. I just want to give you a short introduction into Mpho. Mpho Motseme is an experienced tax educator who has worked for SARS for the past 18 years. She has represented SARS on various external engagements with taxpayers due to her extensive knowledge in various taxpayer segments. Mpho is a member of the Management Services Institute and has qualifications in operations management, project management, and business communication. So I'd like to hand you over to Mpho, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this portion of our webinar. Over to you, Mpho.
Thank you so much, Garth, for that intro, and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Conrad, for an insightful presentation. Conrad will form part of our panelist for the Q&A. Thank you, Conrad. And I also have Banzi Kumbuza. If Banzi, you can switch on your camera. Banzi is a tax consultant from the Durban branch. Welcome, Banzi. We also have Yamgela Somi. Can you please switch on your camera, Yamgela? Yamgela is a team member on the taxpayer and trader education and part of the national enhancement team. Welcome, guys. Okay. We have received some of the questions from the email address that Garth had shared. And
sorry, can I just interrupt you?
Yes.
I've got a problem in showing my face again. If our technical team can just help out here.
Mpho, I suggest while the technical team is sorting that out, if maybe we start with the questions, and once Kunrad's video is enabled, he can then join in with the team. There we go.
There we are.
Thank you and welcome, Conrad. Okay. The first question, I'll pose it to Banzi. Okay. It says, what supporting document is required to substantiate a disability? Banzi, if you can take up that question, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mpho. Now, the document that is required is an ITRDD, which is a confirmation of disability form. This form can be accessed and downloaded from the SARS website. Yeah, so I hope that answers that question, Mpho. Thank you.
Thank you. I see we also had questions on our Q&A, but most of the questions were answered. Thank you, team, for that. The second question, I'll give it to Yamgela. I have been submitting disability expenses for my child who has a permanent disability for the past 3 years, and I submit supporting documents every year. Must the ITRDD form be always attached in my submissions? Yamgela.
All right. Good evening, and thank you very much, Mpho, for that question. I think it did pop up on the Q&A, and I wanted to indicate that I wanted to answer it live. However, I want to believe that Conrad did address it on his presentation. However, for the sake of clarity and certainty, the form must be submitted only upon request. However, the validity must be noted, as Conrad has addressed it. A completed ITRDD form that has been approved by a duly medical registered practitioner will remain valid for a period of 10 years if it's a permanent disability, and then it would be 1 year where the disability is of a temporary nature. Thank you very much, Mpho.
Thank you, Yamgela, for that. Okay, another question that I have, I think I'll pose it to you again, Yamgela. I have a hearing impairment and I need to speak to someone at SARS with regards to claiming my medical expenses, but I'm unable to contact your SARS Contact Centre. Is there an email address that I can use? Yamgela.
All right. Once again, thanks for the question, Mpho. Fortunately, there is an email address which is dedicated for the deaf community. And the email address is _contactdeaf@sars.co.za. sars.gov.za. I repeat, it's _contact@sars.gov.za. The C on contact is in uppercase, as well as the D on deaf is in uppercase as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yamgela, for that. Okay. The next one, I'll pose it to Conrad. It reads, who falls under the category of persons with disabilities? Conrad, if you can take that one, please.
It is people with a moderate to severe physical, communication, vision, hearing, mental and intellectual impairment.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Conrad. The next one, I'll pose it to Banzi. Okay. I have been struggling to get text information relating to my disability on the SARS website. Is there any other easy way for me to go about getting more information? Banzi?
Thank you, Mpho. Thank you, Mpho. I think Conrad did touch on this as well at the end of his presentation, I think on the last slide. But to clarify, the information on disability can be obtained on the SARS website. So taxpayers would have to go to www.sars.gov.za, and they must click on individuals, tax and disability, and all necessary information relating to tax and disability will be available on the web page. Thank you, Mpho.
Thank you, Banzi, for that. Again, on you, Banzi. Why has there been a change from the medical tax deductions to the medical tax credits? Banzi?
Okay, thank you, Mpho. Okay, yeah, so this is quite a common query. So SARS introduced the tax credit system because it felt, SARS felt it was a fair system, or it was a more fair system, because this system looked at all taxpayers, regardless of their level of income. All taxpayers derived the same or the equal tax benefit because the tax credits are fixed and are deductible against normal tax payable, as opposed to simply reducing the taxable income. Because with the previous system of medical aid contributions, the higher the taxpayer's income, the higher the tax benefits or the tax deduction. So that was the reason behind it, Mpho. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Looking at the chat again, I see questions, a lot of questions were answered. Thank you, guys. This one I'll pose it to Conrad. I am visually impaired and I make use of a guide dog. There are quite several expenses I incurred from maintaining and growing my dog. Is there a limit on the expenses that I can claim? Conrad?
You can claim the following expenses: the cost of the dog specifically trained to get them trained, so the training costs, okay, then your veterinary costs, including the food and maintenance for that dog.
Okay, right. Yamgela, I think this one I'll pose to you. Which amount do I capture for the medical scheme contributions made by my employer? Yamgela.
All right. Once again, Mpho, thank you very much for that question. And to answer that question, medical scheme contributions that were paid by your employer will reflect on your IRP5 next to a code which is called 4005, as well as the information would have been submitted by your medical scheme to SARS. So that information will definitely pre-populate on your tax return. So it will be just for you to verify it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Again, to you, Banzi, sorry about that. I pay contributions to a medical scheme, but the medical tax certificate is not in my name, and I have been selected for audit. Which supporting documents must I submit? Banzi?
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so once again, this is a very common question, especially with taxpayers that have claimed disability and how have been selected for audit. So here, the expectation from SARS is that the taxpayer will need to submit an affidavit stating that the main member is a dependent as defined, that is either a spouse or a child or a spouse's child or any family member in respect of whom the taxpayer is liable for care and support. So in addition, the following documentary proof will be required. So proof of payment will be required, which will be in a form of a bank statement showing payments to the medical aid scheme or a letter from the medical aid confirming that the taxpayer that is claiming this deduction is actually the one that is making payments on behalf of the member or the dependent. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Bansi. And this question, I'll pose it to Yamkela. Okay. I made a medical contribution on behalf of my mother, who's financially dependent on me. How do I claim that payment or the contribution that I made on my personal tax returns? Yamkela.
Once again, thank you, Mpho. And to address that question, the amount must be declared next to the code, which I've mentioned, which is 4005, for years which are 2020 and before. And then from 2021 tax year, the amounts must be declared under the code, which is 4035. Thank you, Mpho.
Thank you. I think I have a question on the Q&A. It's from Andre Paul. I'm not sure if it was answered. It says, my daughter's last ITR-DD form is dated June 2019. She suffers from a disability as defined by SARS. Does this dated ITR-DD mean that I can resubmit this form with my tax return every year for the next 10 years? Conrad, are you able to take that question?
Yes. What I said in my presentation, if you qualified as a person with a disability before 1 March 2019, that ITR-DD is valid for a further 5 years. Okay, from the date that ITR-DD was completed. Just for completeness sake, if you qualified as a person with disability after 1 March 2019, that ITR-DD is valid for a further 10 years. Or for 10 years. So in other words, if you now obtain further down the line, when the ITR-DD before 1 March 2019 now expires, the next ITR-DD that you get will then be valid for 10 years. Does it make sense? And did I answer the question?
I believe you have. If the client is not pleased, can you just type on to the chat again? Looking at the chat again, it's a question from Mhloni Penny Zwane. Can a statement from a doctor be accepted as proof that I've paid for medical costs out of my pockets? Yamkela, can you answer that?
Can you repeat the question for me, Paul? Thank you.
Okay. Can a statement from a doctor be accepted as proof that I have paid for my medical costs out of my pocket?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question once again. A statement from the doctor will be acceptable as proof. However, your medical aid tax certificate does cover amounts which were not covered by the medical aid scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamkela. I have a question from Diana Forey. If Conrad can answer for me this question, it says, my client has a son with a disability for a few years. SARS did a self-assessment for the 2022 tax year and did not allow the disability. I did an objection, and then the objection was disallowed in terms of Section 6B of the Income Tax Act. Is that correct, Conrad?
You see, what needs to happen is if SARS did not allow the disability expenses, the route to go is not to lodge an objection. Okay? The first thing that you need to do is you need to submit a return. So if you were self-assessed and you are not in agreement with that self-assessment, then you must submit a return. And if I remember correctly, I think there's 2 weeks left of filing season. Okay. Only once that return has been assessed and you are still not satisfied, then you can lodge an objection. Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad. And thank you again, Yamgela and Banzi. You guys have been a great team. And we are committed in ensuring clarity and insight for continued partnership as we continue to serve our country. Thank you kindly for your participation. So for all other questions that were not answered, and the answers, they will be posted in our website so that you can reference. Thank you so much for your participation, and I will then hand it over to Garth. Thank you, team.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mpho and colleagues. You certainly handled all the questions with a smile and seamlessly so. So congratulations on that. And thank you very much for your prompt responses. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that we've answered the questions posted at the email address, as well as the questions on the Q&A portion of the webinar. If we have not answered your question, please look out on the SARS website under the frequently asked questions for the response to your question. As you can see, I have just been affected by load shedding myself. So Conrad, looks like I've taken over the baton from you on the load shedding schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to the end of our formal program for this webinar. So I would like to thank you for your time and patience, as well as your attention during the webinar. It was really a pleasure for me to participate in this. I certainly have learned a lot. Before I sign off, I'd like to thank the team, my colleagues who were participating during the Q&A, as well as Conrad for their participation, and a special thanks to Lana Lowe and Ansi, who had provided us with the interpretation services during this webinar. Thank you very much, ladies. I'd like to also thank the technical team who have worked behind the scenes to make sure that this webinar is possible. Thank you very much for your time and attention, colleagues. And I would like to say a heartfelt thank you from the team who set up this webinar. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, before I sign off for the evening, please participate in our survey as you are leaving this webinar. I'd like to thank you for your time and for your patience. And once again, thank you for enduring with us during the technical challenges we have. I bid you a good night and God bless. Thank you for your time. Good night.
Fellow South Africans, I'm addressing you.
All your years of paying tax, you still wonder, why does it matter?
It is true that we are facing a grave emergency.
It matters now more than ever. It matters to those who are exposed to harm to keep us away from it. The ones that leave behind all that they love. Your tax matters to them. Those who spend endless hours standing on their feet to care for others. It matters to those who are always at the heart of any crisis and our future generations. It matters to those who put so much love into giving selflessly to each and every family living on the breadline. It matters to all of us. To all taxpayers, pay your fair share. Do it for your nation. Your tax matters.